Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.
We are back with another episode of the Tech Behind FinTech. Really excited for this conversation. Joining me is Brian Soby, CEO of AppOmni, and today's conversation is about SaaS data breaches. The exact title of the show today is, I want to get this right, is the SaaS Breach Epidemic, Why Financial Data Has Never Been More Exposed. Brian, how are you doing today?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, man. Really excited to jump into today's topic. Before we do that, let's just do some housekeeping. We are streaming live from LinkedIn and YouTube. We also have a stream going from Instagram. So when I look this way, so my Instagram people, join the techbehindfintech.com so you don't only see the side of my face. You could also see Brian as we talk about this discussion. So let me do my guest justice. Let me read his bio, and then we will jump into today's topic. Brian Soby, Chief Technology Officer and co-founder at AppOmni, is a technology security professional with 20 years of experience spanning applications and security. He has worked in fintech, defense, and SaaS at both large and small companies. Past roles include Director of Security at fintech company Taulia, Partner at FreeFly Security, Director of Product Security at Salesforce, Lead Information Security Engineer at MITRE, the not-for-profit federally funded organization known for its work in cybersecurity and national defense, and network security engineer at American defense contractor at Raytheon. Love the bio, man. You're a security guy, man, my friend.
Yeah, pretty much since I've been probably about 19. I realized that security is my thing and started breaking into software, doing that for government, switching over to commercial, fintech, and now here I am on the vendor side with a SaaS security company.
I love that. Let's, I wasn't going to go there, but since you mentioned it, I want to go there. At 19, how did you realize that? Like, so walk me through that experience. What was happening at that time? How did you get into computer science? How did that process work for you?
So I went to a small school in St. Petersburg, Florida called Eckerd College. Eckert's a great school, but it's small. And they had, I originally started as a marine bio major because Eckerd's all in the water, great program. And I lived in Florida at the time, but quickly realized that marine bio is it's a combination of a bunch of other majors, which makes it a tremendous amount of work. And there's not a lot of jobs in the field. So switched over to computer science. A couple of years into that, started getting really interested in how to break software. And the school at the time didn't really have much in the way of a computer science or a computer security program. So I ended up doing a bunch of really independent studies in the area of security, which was really boiled down to break into everything I could find on campus and turn that into a curriculum for future classes. And so I just kind of got into it independently, turned that into a job in the defense space because Raytheon was also in St. Petersburg and they just picked up a big Navy contract to rebuild what's called the Navy Marine Corps Intranet. And they had the security portion of that. So I sort of parlayed that into a defense job.
Amazing. What year are we talking about? Did this happen?
I graduated college in 2001. So, right around there was kind of the transition out of academic and into defense.
Graduated in 2001, so that was like 1999 or so. You were into security at that time.
Yep.
Dude, that's so amazing because as you know, obviously from being in the field for a while, it was needed, but it wasn't as trendy as it is now. Or maybe I would say it got you started to see security get really, really noticed after around like 2014, 15. It was a bunch of big breaches around that time. And a lot of programs started, educational programs for graduate schools and things like that, and more search. not saying people were not into it prior, but really more recognition. So to get in it that early, it's totally amazing.
In the early days, it was really funny too, because the nature of the vulnerabilities, it was just comically bad, just really exceptionally bad. Everything had buffer overflows. Everything had SQL injection, just really easy classes of things to exploit. Really bad trust relationships where you could just, passwordless login from one system to another by exploiting that. E-shoplifting came around at that time, which is another comically bad class of vulnerability. So I guess it was an easier time to get into security because everything was a disaster and pretty much everything was massively vulnerable. But it's good that we got away from that. And it's good that we've matured as a field of technology to make sure that it's not all low hanging fruit everywhere. You actually have to try a little bit more now than you used to have to.
It was interesting because I was in school. I came in 94 undergrad, and I was majoring in computer science also. And I went to Temple on university. I mean, yeah, networking, we had different fields, but security, and it wasn't a particular branch in there. You're thinking about security overall. You mentioned it, but that wasn't really a conversational topic. It was more programming, more like network in general. If you want to go into that, we had to take classes of that, obviously. So jumping in it like that early, especially self-studying and assisting your university with the curriculum by just experimenting, by breaking into things in campus. I mean, look, application security, like right now, is not 100%. You thought to look at some companies that don't really that are not as advanced in that. You still have issues with OWASP top 10. So imagine 20 years ago, right? So I just think that's awesome that you got into that early, and also that you took the route of self-studying and getting into penetration testing. And at the time, did you even call it penetration testing? You was just hacking experiment. I mean, now it's obviously different terms for it. So I find that like pretty impressive, man. That's awesome.
Yeah, it was a fun time to do it. Back then, we were still learning, but like we didn't know about memory safety that well. Like Hacking Exposed came out in that time period, which was mind blowing to a lot of people that a lot of these things were even possible. And so it was half research because there were whole new classes of things that we now take for granted and are common. But back then it was, we were just discovering new ways that you could make mistakes. It feels like we're about to get back into that type of problem with a lot of the AI coding, because some of the mistakes that AI makes while coding are like, this is really basic stuff. Like, why would you ever, take somebody's password and pass it out through an API? Like, that's craziness. We learned that a long time ago. AI apparently wants to relearn all these lessons. So we're gonna be thrown back a little bit, I think.
I mean, but I look at it as it's par for the course, right? It's like, especially when you're dealing with AI and training, right? It's gonna make mistakes. You have to come in and say, "Oh no, don't do that. This isn't the way it's done," and then it learns. Okay, for next time when I code, I'm not gonna like you just said, pass in maybe unencrypted passwords or that in general through an API. Don't But it's that evolution of training. So totally makes sense. Um, you know, I'm curious because the MITRE framework. I think it helped a lot of people. Definitely helped me. They have a new one now for AI called Atlas. But want to get your opinion. Like, what lessons from MITRE kind of still shapes the way you think about cybersecurity?
So MITRE as an organization is excellent. It is a bunch of people that truly want to do the right thing and act in the public interest. And that mentality is everywhere through the organization. It's a big difference coming from the other side of the fence in defense over to MITRE, which is very much a public interest company, and that attitude permeates everywhere. And so thinking about the problem, thinking about security in general from the perspective of the end user, from the perspective of the customer, what is the best thing for people? If it's people's data involved, they are the primary people we're here to protect. And it's that kind of mentality that I think is probably the thing that I am most grateful for my time at MITRE was a good framing of the problem to make sure that we're not just here to sell products that, maybe snake oil or whatever. We're here to do a job, which is to protect people. And in the various ways that manifests, protect their data, protect their experience, protect their identity, all of those things. And that is the number one thing that we're here to do as security people, even security vendors. We need to make sure that our product works to solve real problems.
That makes sense. I just really respect the organization for the amount of resources they put out and just constantly for the public good, and also helping to educate security professionals. Like I said, I leverage that attack framework. For those that don't know, it's basically a framework saying, how an attack starts from the very beginning to reconnaissance to lateral movements, all through the cycle of how a threat actor would engage, an organization and cause harm to it. So that's been extremely beneficial throughout my career. So what inspired you to co-found AppOmni? Like what was the main problem that you saw that no one else did?
So I spent a few years at Salesforce. I was actually one of the early members of the product security team there, and we fielded a large number of incidents that customers had related to their usage of Salesforce. We also spun up the AppExchange security process, which is a marketplace where other vendors put their products that integrate with Salesforce. There's some announcement actually that came out earlier this week, Salesforce saying that, that's it. We're tired of non-AppExchange integrations because they present security risks. Everything needs to go through this security review process. But it was a lot of really hands-on experience with how problems and how breaches happen in SaaS. After leaving Salesforce, I went to a fintech, Taulia. They do factoring, so dynamic discounting, things like that, but then left to start a consultancy focused largely on SaaS security, because that was an area where I had a lot of direct experience, and there was a very real problem there. But what I found fairly quickly is that no matter how much you try to help people on a consulting basis secure what are effectively living applications, because especially the big ones, the Microsofts, the ServiceNows, the Salesforces, the Workdays, these products are the backbones of your organization. You're changing them all the time. You have teams of people dedicated to doing it, but they're effectively living, and they're very, very complicated. As a consultant, we could go in and we could help people say, hey, do you realize you're exposing data to places you don't want, or people can log in using phish passwords, all those things. And it would be a great consulting report. You'd get hundreds of findings, and then you'd present them, and the customer would work to go through that. But the problem became 6 months later, because these are living systems, they would have regressed fully or partially back into that insecure state. I think you get the same thing with software. Like if you do a dynamic scan or a static analysis scan once on a software application, it's not valid. It doesn't protect you 6 months later. Like you've already introduced a bunch of other stuff. And what I had realized was that same thing was true in SaaS. And so that's where we ended up creating a product company to do that on a continuous basis, to make sure that customers are aware of how these breaches actually happen. Because these big behemoth applications, your IT people are going to spend 6 months over the course of a couple of years in training just to learn the ins and outs. Your security people have no idea. Like they don't even know what salespeople do for a living. They definitely don't know the ins and outs of the sales process SaaS applications. They're certainly not going to go from there to Workday and learn the ins and outs of what your HR department is doing in those types of systems. Yet they're responsible for securing them. So we're in this really weird situation as a security industry where our business units are really responsible for a lot of the core applications that our companies are using. And the security team they're just sort of outmatched by the number of IT counterparts running these things and the amount of experience that they need to do a good job. And there's really no way for their teams to scale based on the number of people. So they really need platforms that can help them secure this stuff and make sure that they have even though they may not be experts in a given platform, if that platform is exposing data or has other vulnerabilities, they know about it immediately, and they can be informed as to how to resolve those by working with their counterparts. So that was really the catalyst, was to see that gap and know that, okay, this is SaaS breaches, as data moves more and more online and into cloud, and certainly after COVID, pretty much everything moved online immediately. This is where the next frontier of breaches is going to be, and we need to be ahead of that.
You know what? So, I mean, that's interesting, right? That you mentioned those types of back end tools from literally, at times publicly traded vendors, right? I think the assumption from security professionals is, we're integrating or we're leveraging this tool in the back end. They take the necessary steps to be secure, right? They have thousands of clients. They have a tremendous amount of resources. What are some of the things that you've seen in that regards to like one of those systems being vulnerable and then impacting the customer?
So it's not so much that they're insecure at the software or hosting or any of that layer. I mean, we have vulnerabilities came out this week around React that actually apparently being exploited like today and yesterday. And the fix to that is to apply patches. Hey, you need to update this thing and you need to deploy it. All of your cloud vendors, to include your SaaS vendors, are very, very good at that. They're much better than companies running their own on-prem stuff. If you want to look at the average time to patch between a SaaS vendor doing it for their own product or a company doing it for all of their, vulnerable Log4j type stuff, like Log4j took forever for companies to patch all of their applications. SaaS vendors do it like immediately. So they're much better at securing the things that they're responsible for. But what I think, especially security teams forgot, was that they're not responsible for everything. When a customer gets if you get a new instance of Salesforce, it is secure out of the box. And then your team, the customer's team, gets a hold of it and starts configuring it for various business processes. That is where the insecurities come in. It's not on the vendor side of the responsibility. It's a customer literally saying, authorization. Authorization is really hard. How do I figure out who's supposed to see and edit what data? Well, why don't we just do that later? We'll just make that everybody can do everything, and we'll do that later. And then they add a portal where their customers can log in, but suddenly that decision they made 5 years ago about everybody can do everything, everybody is now the whole world. So it's like, this was you, customer. You had a part to play here, and you were pretty much exclusively responsible for the vulnerabilities that were created because it was your configuration that you put in place. The shortcuts, the whoopsies, I didn't realize that particular feature had those effects. All that stuff all builds together. And when your security relies on a non-security incentivized person to basically point and click their way through an application for 10 years and be right every time, you're going to have gaps. And I've been to a lot of these conferences for a lot of these products, and I've tried to talk to admins about security. One of the most interesting experiences I had is I was at a big SaaS vendor conference, and I was doing the booth barker thing, and I was asking the admins if they want to talk how to secure their stuff. The only time this ever happened to me, I had people stop, turn to me just to laugh at me and say, no, like that's not our job. Okay. Do you know whose job it is? And do they know that it's their job? And do they have any idea what you do day in and day out? Like, you're saying it's not your job because you don't get a bonus based on security. You get a bonus based on, the new support process being in place in 2 weeks. But there's just nobody. There's nobody there to do it. And so that leads to the inevitable breaches that we've been seeing, certainly from the summer until now. It's just been a wave, breach after breach. And it's the inevitable outcome of that situation. There's just nobody responsible for security.
It's interesting that you say that. Helped organizations get SOC 2 compliant. And then, one of the controls, and that's just one of the many different security governance models that various fintechs and organizations use, right? To look at security holistically and say, if we put these practices in place, it could help us be more secure. And one of the things you have to do there is literally account for all of your applications that you use, SaaS-based, different vendors and so forth, and look at access controls. Who has access? Does this person still work here? Right? The headlight, right? Like, you get into situations where people that no longer work there, their usernames might still have access, or somebody might have transitioned roles, right? Do they still need access at this level to this application? So, and what we see is organizations are not reviewing things like that on a, constant basis, whether it's monthly, quarterly, whatever. And you have some users, right? They've been in the organizations for a long time, switch multiple roles, and now this guy is like a super admin of various applications. He no longer necessarily manages, but no one ever reviewed it. So it's interesting that you said that, because I've seen that in real time.
Yeah, I mean, movers levers is kind of hard, and it's hard to do. It's a high level of overhead. And what happens is people take shortcuts. And when they start looking at like, what is the level of access that so-and-so has in this system? You have a couple of things. One is when a new person joins a team, what level of access is needed? Give them the same level as their manager. And so you end up with this like access creep. Everybody bubbles up to this top level of access. And then there's a lot more to it than, oh, that is a sales manager. That's their level of access. Well, what does that mean? What does that translate into? And do you have all this stuff configured that when the directory system or the identity provider puts them into the sales manager role, is that sales manager role configured correctly? Oh, they can edit their own paychecks. Probably not what a sales manager needs to be doing. So there's a level of abstraction that we put on it to make this process easier for ourselves. And that ends up hiding a lot of the reality of what their actual entitlements are. And so that's another problem that we very often see.
Definitely interesting. And to the audience, right? Because I know I take it for granted using acronyms. SaaS, right? Software as a service, right? So the concept is essentially we have software in the cloud, meaning it's hosted by a vendor, and we have access to that cloud, and we then use it in our own organizations and so forth. So I just wanted to mention that, based on everything that you said, what would you say what makes SaaS different from traditional applications from a security perspective?
It's mostly that the vendor's running it for you. You don't have it sitting on a server that's in your, that server room or a data center or anything like that. You don't have to deal with Windows patches and Linux patches and all those kind of sysadmin jobs. The vendor handles all that for you. You just get to log in. Like your interaction with that software application is just, it exists somewhere in the internet. You just go log in, and you have no responsibility for it running, having backups and all these other things that aren't really core to your business anyhow. Like a shoe company doesn't want to be in the business of technology. They want to be in the business of shoes. And so what SaaS allows companies to do is refocus on those things that are actually within their core competencies and their core business, and not have to also be a technology company. And so it's just it's a very easy to use way to consume business software.
Why has SaaS become the fastest growing attack surface in the financial services industry?
I think it largely goes back to the problem of this is an area where people haven't been paying attention. The customers and SaaS vendors themselves sold the concept of SaaS and the cloud as secure very, very hard. And they said, look how much better we can operate these products compared to them sitting under somebody's desk, which is 100% true. But they sold it so hard that companies adopted this mindset of, well, if we use SaaS, then we don't have to worry about anything, to include security. I can't do any wrong because it's a SaaS delivered application. And what we've seen recently, has been the bad guys have very clearly figured out that this is now the easiest place to attack. Companies have all, like, we just did this whole thing with MFA everywhere, and the identity single sign-on everywhere. Now we have zero trust to get us from our devices out to the internet. We have all these different things, and the bad guys pretty much said, hey, we could just bypass all of that just by going directly to these SaaS applications that are not particularly well configured, not particularly well secured. The security people don't even know where they are. They don't even know what their company is using. They definitely don't have visibility into what's going on inside those applications. And we can bypass, 95% of the company's IT security budget, just step around it, go directly to these apps. And oh, by the way, that is now where all of the critical data lives and all the critical business process lives. So it's the inevitable outcome of that situation that they would do that.
What would you say was the biggest surprise when you started to look at enterprises and the way they leverage SaaS and things? Like, you started to analyze, what was the biggest surprise from a security perspective that you noticed? You were like, wow, this is crazy.
Defaults and shortcuts. So a lot of these applications are very open by default, because as a vendor, you want to promote adoption. Nobody wants to buy a new thing and have to spend the first 3 weeks doing like scaffolding. And so it's very easy to get started, very quick time to value. But because of that, a lot of the defaults end up being pretty open. There's no for user authentication. It's username and password unless otherwise. Like, unless you do something, that's where you start off. For who can access what, it's probably everybody can do everything unless you do something about it. That's kind of the first challenge. And then the second challenge is, from that, the customers start taking shortcuts. Hey, yeah, I'll just do that part later. Let me explicitly make that very open. Or what we've seen a lot lately has been supply chain attacks. So companies compromised, products compromised because of their access to other products. And so at some point, a lot of the admins were given a choice of, what do you want to be allowed to connect here? Anything your users feel like plugging in? Or do you want to explicitly go through and say, only these things may be connected? Well, that requires understanding your business, and that's hard. So I'm just going to leave that wide open, and then anybody can plug in anything they want. So you have a lot of shortcuts, and it's kind of the perfect storm for a lot of these problems. You have very, very exposed supply chain. You have very, very open security controls. You generally have very poor authentication. Even the companies that hook up single sign-on. One of my biggest problems with the way that companies view that passwordless single sign-on view is, hey, let's go get this application enabled such that we can, with just, I get the tile of different applications I can log into. I pick one of the tiles and I'm suddenly just in that application because my single sign-on provider logged me in. Oh, it's also secure because I don't have to use a password anymore. Not really, because single sign-on is now an additional way that you can log in. But when somebody phishes your password, or there's malware on your laptop that steals your password, that can still be used to go log into that application. So you didn't get any security benefit. You basically created a convenience login mechanism, yet everybody's saying, hey, boss, we've got the whole single sign-on problem solved, or MFA is solved, because they have to do it once when they log into the single sign-on system in the morning, not realizing that doesn't matter. Like, what that system thinks is reality is relevant. All these different applications still believe the user can use that 5-year-old terrible password and log directly into the application and not have MFA and not have any of those things. So we've created a lot of this fake security that is just trivially sidestepped.
Let's dive into the single sign-on, because I think that's a huge topic, right? Like, most companies use that. So you're saying single sign-on is enabled, but to your point, right? That's just an additional login step. But let's say if someone clicked on a link, they downloaded malware from a phishing attack and so forth. If that original password can be located, the attacker can still use their username and password to log in behind the scenes.
Yep. Probably 90+% of applications that we see that have single sign-on enabled, it's enabled and optional, which means it is not a security control whatsoever. It's a convenience mechanism. That's it. And people figured this out once they have like the Snowflake breaches that happened like 2 years ago. Like, most of those customers had single sign-on and had all those things, but the bad guys just bought stolen passwords for 50 cents and went directly to the applications to log in. And only then did people realize, like, wait a second, how did that happen? We have this set up to be single sign-on. Oh, yeah, we have to go do the harder process, which is to go through, and sometimes it is really challenging, to go through and disable other login mechanisms for various cohorts of users. And organizations want to do this. They want to leave some still on password, like their quote unquote break glass accounts. If everything goes down, they still want to be able to log in. So it's like this user needs to still allow for passwords. These users can't. These users are customers, so they can't be on single sign-on. It ends up being really complicated. And going back to shortcuts, people just say, yeah, we'll deal with that part later. Right now, we'll just enable single sign-on and we'll call that a day.
So we have a question or statement from an audience member. We're going to get to that in a second. One question. So what's the recommendation? Would the recommendation be, if we enable single sign-on, we disable other mechanisms from logging in?
Yeah, like know that is a thing, which is the first problem. Like a lot of organizations don't, their identity team ends up being very separate from their other team. So their identity team comes in, makes it work, and then disappears. And meanwhile, the application administrator team, they're the ones that need to go through and say, okay, disable the ability to use weak logins for all these other users. They don't even know that they have to do that. And then doing that and understanding where you have and have not done that is a much harder problem than just enabling single sign-on. And so they have to take on, which is what's actually a fairly difficult project to get the security value out of all of their identity security and single sign-on stuff. And they just don't, for the most part. And so that's a much harder problem that we do need to do. And we do need to have good visibility around, at the source of truth, which is not your single sign-on system. The source of truth is all of your different applications. What is the scenario? What is the current state with respect to these security controls? Ignoring all the other ones. Like your zero trust stuff doesn't work, doesn't matter if your application doesn't care about it. Your identity stuff doesn't matter if your application doesn't care about it. So get visibility into what the applications think is the truth, because that is the truth.
We're gonna jump into a audience question. LinkedIn user. Unfortunately, I can't see your name, but I'm just good. So that's why I'm saying LinkedIn user. Happy Friday, Andy and Brian. One component that comes to mind recently is with the vendors that incorporate non-human identities, NHI, and agents that run in these environments. Monitoring SaaS environments for security versus business needs has been an issue. What are your thoughts on that, Brian?
So non-human identity, and I'll treat this kind of generically. So we've had service accounts and stuff forever, and we've always called them service accounts. And non-human identity is really just kind of a new way to label things. But it's very relevant to the supply chain breaches that we've had. We had one with a company called SalesLoft, a product called Drift. We just had one a week or two ago with another sales application called Gainsight. And what's happening is that people have realized that a really easy way to steal data is to go break into these platforms that are plugged in everywhere. And they know that those platforms have credentials to go log into all these customer instances of various products. And so they go into the platforms, they steal all those credentials, and they go hit all of those products under each one of those customer accounts, those non-human identity service accounts, and they steal all those customers' data. This is becoming the first one is very, very successful. And so what happened with the second one, the Gainsight one we just saw, was a different threat actor group simply borrowed their tactics and said, oh, that works great. We're going to do that too. It's becoming a very serious problem, and we can solve it today, but solving it is, again, it goes back to willingness to do the harder work and not try to take shortcuts. Like you can lock the Gainsight connection down such that it must come from Gainsight and not the middle of Russia or Tor or some random VPN proxy. But that requires having more understanding of what's going on. That probably requires your security team being involved. And so they get involved, they make sure that all the normal security processes are happening. And right now they're not happening too much. And then with AI agents, it's just more, it's more surface area. So AI agents, sometimes they run as their own users. Sometimes they run as the user they're interacting with. Sometimes they can reach out and do other stuff. I think what we've seen very clearly is that AI agents can be manipulated. Like there is no platform that hosts AI in a way that where the agents cannot be tricked. And we've seen prompt injection and other classes of vulnerabilities. The current state of AI is such that it is inevitable that your agents can be tricked. And so what you want to do is you want to understand what can those agents actually do within these systems? Because the agent that can only read your documentation isn't that big of a deal. The agent that can transfer money is an entirely different, multiple orders of magnitude more risk. And so you need to understand what you've given the agency ability to do. And then you need meaningful monitoring around what they are actually doing. And if you don't have that, you are not in a place where you should be using AI.
That's really interesting. Another service accounts, yeah, definitely an issue. This is Jeff. Jeff's a longtime viewer of our show. We appreciate his comments and his viewership. Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate you. Really, really interesting. You said I always had a thought about security, and this has been my general thought about it, because you just mentioned agents and things like that. I've always thought and felt with enough time and resources, anything digital can be breached. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think it's generally true. And this goes back to my experience pen testing and breaking software. If you wait long enough, there'll be a whole new class of vulnerability that gets discovered that people didn't even know they needed to protect against. With AI, I saw a report probably about 3 weeks ago where people were talking about they used automated pen testing against various AI like firewall products, and then they used manual pen testing against it. And every single concept of AI firewall, and there's a huge industry of like AI security that's just put this thingy in front of your AI agent and it'll block the bad stuff. And that's like the primary control. Every single one of them that they tested, they eventually got through. And that's just the state of where we are. As it exists today, AI, and largely I'm talking about LLMs because that is the dominant form that people are using for agents and things like that. They commingle instructions and data. And it's an architectural weakness that there's no way around. In the current architecture, there's no way to secure it. And so we can try to put badness detectors in front of them, but eventually somebody will trick the badness detector. Like they were 100% successful with every major product that exists out there. So when it comes to securing them, you can't just rely on detecting and blocking the badness. You need to look at when the bad stuff gets through, what are my consequences? Can this transfer money? Can this only read documentation? And then you need to have oversight saying, I need to know at all times everything my agents are doing, and I need to be looking at whether or not that's weird, given what it's supposed to be doing. That agent that's supposed to help people onboard stuff shouldn't be, I don't know, sending a pallet of laptops to Thailand. Like that's a bad behavior for that agent. But if you don't have that visibility, it's inevitable that they will be tricked. And if you're not looking at the blast radius and you're not looking at what actually has been done, ideally in close kind of to a real-time form, then like it's only going to go one direction for you. And that's eventually, once somebody decides to look at your stuff, then it's going to go poorly for you. One of the concepts that I've always liked is an aviation theory called the Big Sky theory. The Big Sky theory describes why two like little Cessnas flying around in uncontrolled airspace, like why they're not just with each other all the time. And in aviation, same with in shipping, they call it the Big Sky theory. They just say it's a big sky. That's the reason the Cessnas aren't colliding with each other. There's no real control. It's just too big of a sky. It's big ocean theory. Two sailboats with both the people sleeping. They haven't hit each other because it's a big ocean. In reality, that is the primary protection for most companies in security. They have not compromised your stuff because there are too many other companies out there that they're currently compromising.
Always looked at it from the concept of if it was just two companies in the world, let's just say two people. Let's just give this example. I look at security like this, right? The bear concept, right? If me and you are running from a bear, I don't have to be faster than the bear. I'd be faster than you, right? Yeah. So like with security, I'm like, yeah, if there's 5 houses on the block and 4 of those houses have open doors, and the one that doesn't is locked and has a security sign on the front. It's not that the attacker can't get into that house, but why work extra hard? I'm gonna go to the lowest hanging fruit, and I'm gonna exploit that. So, and I think that goes back to, you know, what we're talking about with SaaS and security in general is basic controls, right, over certain things will prevent it. That's not saying that, okay, if a nation state actor is with unlimited resources is targeting your organization, you have basic controls, it's going to save you, right? But, you know, if regular, you know, like criminal organizations are looking at it, like, yeah, okay, we're doing this, it's not as easy. Let's go to a lower hanging fruit. What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's 100% true, 100% true. But the question on everybody's minds lately is whether or not the use of agents in the exploitation chain is going to change that equation. That's why, you know, LinkedIn and all the hype kind of stuff blew up the other week when Anthropic talked about interrupting a nation state attack sequence that used Anthropic AI capabilities in order to go exploit things. So they said, oh, look, you know, nation states are now incorporating AI into their exploitation, and all the security vendors blew up and, you know, try to sell whatever based on that. But it's a real concern. If you had a attack capability that incorporates AI sufficient to say anything below this bar, it can break into automatically. And it will do this 24 hours a day. It will have 7,000 copies of itself running at all times. And anything below this bar is just going to be breached. And it doesn't matter how big or small or anything they are. The AI is a capability to do X. Like, to use your house analogy, it has the ability to pick terrible, you know, residential locks. And that's like that. We gave it up to there. It would break into 99.9% of houses. And so will we get AI used in attack sequences? Absolutely. Like, nobody in their right mind, nobody that breaks into stuff for a living is not thinking about how to do that. Every single person is thinking about how to do that. So it's only a question of when did those attack chains that are easily automated and will be everywhere, working very, very quickly, when do they develop enough capability where the current good enough is now within their capability to breach?
That's an excellent point. And then it's the ever chasing bar, right? So on your side, you have to now raise the bar. And with the hopes of, in the bear analogy, your competitors and other people are not as fast. So it's constantly just staying one step ahead of the situation. I want to talk about data sprawl. Can you help us understand what is data sprawl and why is it so dangerous to organizations, especially in your business of protecting SaaS applications?
Yeah, I mean, I think as an industry, we've gone back and forth a little bit with how to treat data. And so we had, all right, we're gonna have all of our critical data protected in these like centralized places. And then certainly with SaaS and cloud, it escaped. Now, oh, that particular business process that runs in this one application in the cloud. So all data related to that ends up, it's now, you know, in this one place where we can protect it, plus this other thing. And what we've seen in the past, I don't know, 5-10 years is that all of those strategies that relied on, you know, kind of that M&M defense, hey, we're going to harden the whole perimeter and have all the data inside the perimeter and such that we can harden it. Those have all blown up because now your data is scattered everywhere. And now what we're seeing is a lot of this driven by AI use cases. People are saying, hey, all my data is scattered everywhere. I need additional copies of it because I want to do ML or data science or something like that over all of my stuff. So now I want a data lake that's going to have copies of all the data that exists everywhere. Oh, it's also going to be in this data lake. We see this with a lot of companies that do backups and data protection are starting to try to reposition themselves as their data they're not just backups. It is a secondary lake of your data that can be used for other purposes. why go to Workday and ServiceNow and Microsoft to go get your data via API when you have it all because you back it up already and you can now operate and do different things on that. So we went from concentrated to very distributed to now both, where we have concentrated it again in these big data lakes, and it's also distributed in all these different applications where we're doing the primary processing. So we have primary data and then we have secondary data, and the controls, certainly as you get to secondary data, get looser and looser and looser.
So, and so that's like the data process. Basically, data all over the place, not controlled, probably, not a full understanding of where all this data is deployed. So if you can't protect what you can't see, or you don't, right? So it's that aspect. What solutions can companies utilize to protect their data, especially with the scenario you described where it's all over the place?
One of the big challenges that they face is that the identifying who can access the data in the different places, there's not one solution to that, because like the way you give somebody access to data in Microsoft is totally different than the way you give somebody access to data in Workday. Like those two have nothing in common. And so you can't easily say, Jane Doe here, tell me everything that she can do everywhere. That's an extraordinarily hard problem. You can do it at a course level. You can say, oh, well, she has admin there and employee role here and whatever, but it doesn't really translate into the specifics about what data she has access to. So you need to be able to do that. You need to be able to say, I need to know every place that Jane can go, and I need to know what she can do in those different systems. And then on the secondary side, I think we're just going to need to learn some hard lessons, because we see this a lot in these secondary use cases where data is well protected and we pay a lot of attention to who can see and do what in Oracle financials, for example. We have auditors looking at that, our ERP system, we have all sorts of audits and security and all sorts of stuff, but then we copy the data out and we put it in a big data lake for people to do bulk stuff. Okay, I probably don't have the same integrity concerns, because I can't necessarily write a paycheck out of that. If I mess with the data there, it corrupts it. It doesn't cause my payroll system to issue paychecks, but my confidentiality requirements are exactly the same. Yet I have now just copied stuff from everywhere into this big thing where I no longer have that same level of ability to lock it down, and I'm probably not paying as much attention to it. It is a challenge, and it feels like we're going to go through another one of these learning phases where it's going to take a couple of examples of why that's a bad idea before we go back to paying attention to security in these secondary locations.
We're almost kind of coming towards time. I want to kind of like leave the audience with some stuff. If you can provide an overall blueprint, right? So here are some pillars that organizations should think through regarding their SaaS security. What would those be?
So the first thing that needs to happen is that the security team needs to understand that they have a job to do, and that security wasn't magically handled for them in these places, and that they need to be involved. So if they don't have visibility, if they don't know what's going on, then they shouldn't expect that security is being done well, because it isn't. The second is to look at your security architectures. I mentioned zero trust a couple of times, especially with distributed workforce. Zero trust is a big thing. However, if your entire zero trust strategy is based on securing your laptops and then providing, what is in effect a fancy VPN to go from laptop to application, and then you sort of stop, well, that's going to be a problem. You never included the destinations within your security architecture. And you have all these other gaps, like your customer users or your contractors, people whose laptops you can't put agents on and clients on and security stuff on. Well, they're logging in to these applications. They're opening up support tickets in your stuff. They have portals where they're self-servicing data and working with your company. None of the security stuff that you're talking about as the backbone of your security architecture even applies. And so don't be surprised when you have data breaches to, external users and the anonymous internet, because you never bothered to include the applications into your security architecture. And so it's just, we're missing the fundamentals today. We're missing, hey, you spent $10 million on this big identity thing, but your applications effectively ignore it. Like we don't have to get into deep, hard technical things just to do the fundamentals. It's like, stop building 3-sided fences around the power station. Like you're not going to get any ROI for a 3-sided fence. You're going to spend a bunch of money and you're not going to get any security value. Like you need to actually do the whole thing if you want to get any ROI from it. And unfortunately, we're not there yet. We just kind of let these things float out there in the ether. We don't pay any attention, and they're now becoming the big targets.
And looking at some of the platforms, I think I read when I was reading up on this and some of the stuff you sent, like the average company uses like 150 SaaS applications, right? And what do you see? Is there one that, because of the configuration, is more exploited than others? Like, whether it's Microsoft 365, whether it's Google Workspace, whether it's Workday, because you mentioned that a few times, Salesforce. Are you seeing a pattern with a particular one? Not blaming the vendor per se, but in the way the organization configures it, and then you're seeing things happen from that.
I wouldn't say a particular application. I would say classes of applications, because your biggest 10 applications represent 90% of your risk. Like, yeah, you could use thousands of applications. The random note-taking application that somebody likes to use doesn't really matter that much. Your critical applications in different areas. So your productivity stuff. So that's going to be Microsoft or Google, like whatever it is that you use. The places that you put your files, that could also be Microsoft or Google, but it could be like Dropbox, it could be Box. Certainly your core business systems, your Workdays for HR stuff, your Salesforce for your sales organization, your IT big systems like your ServiceNows. Those are your crown jewels. They have all the critical data. They have all the critical business process. And if you look at the attacks that are actually happening, they all go towards them. Nobody's looking at the note-taking app. Nobody's spending time doing that. They're not trying to break into that. They don't care. If they do pick off one of these secondary applications, they do it to get into the bigger apps. Like this, we've seen this lesson over and over and over in the last 6 months. It's happened like 4 or 5 times. If they go pick off a secondary app, they break into the entire platform. So it's not like customer misconfiguration, is the vendor didn't secure something correctly. And then they use that access. Their primary goal is spreading into the big applications, because that's what's important. That's where the data is. That's where people need to focus their attention to stop the bleeding and to get a handle on things.
Last question, we could probably get into more questions from that, but overall, where do you see the SaaS security industry heading in the next 3 to 5 years?
So one of the big predictions when AI stuff first came out is like, oh, SaaS is going to die. It's all going to be AI agents doing everything. And customers are going to, especially with the vibe coding, everybody is going to vibe code their own SaaS system to do their stuff specific to them. Everybody that has said that has never been in the actual software business. Like my mom's company, she has no interest in having a bunch of vibe coded software stuff that breaks all the time, like that she has to take care of and her company has to take care of. Like, that is a ridiculous worldview. And what we see in the AI agent side is that all of the agents, all of the major SaaS applications are becoming the AI agent platforms. And it makes sense because it's where all the data lives already, and it's where the business process lives. And if I'm going to have AI involved in my payroll, I don't want a greenfield AI agent arbitrarily doing payroll stuff, because we know that they hallucinate. We know that they're unreliable. I would much rather give it the ability for, an employee that's interacting with an agent to have that agent trigger real hard-coded business process that is, validated and all that stuff. And that business process exists in those SaaS applications. So I think what we're going to see is the continuation of all of your major SaaS applications becoming the major AI agent platforms that you use. And so ServiceNow is going to have a bunch of ServiceNow unique agents on it. Actually, I think they just did a big acquisition, as did Workday. And so security of those platforms is going to need to catch up with that. And it goes back to the core principles. It goes back to, what agents do you have? What can they do? What are they doing? And all of those things. But the inclusion of agents into SaaS is probably the next big frontier for SaaS in general, and SaaS security to follow.
Wow, because it's in line with what you said earlier, where it's like, instead of agents, but actual people. Like, what access do they have? What controls do they have? And you're viewing it in the same way, because if we just take agents out of the vernacular, what access does anything like, what ability does anything have in your system? And we need to understand that, whether that's an agent, whether that's a human, if it can log in and do some sort of activities on the system, we need to understand what they can do, what are their access controls, what are the capabilities, and so forth. What do they have access to? And it's just in line with what one of the comments you mentioned earlier. We were talking about the pillars and security in general for SaaS.
That's exactly the right way to think about it. It's not too dissimilar from insider threat. It's not too dissimilar from an employee getting phished. It's basically the same strategy.
I love it. And this has been a very interesting conversation. I mean, when we do shows on security, it's always near and dear to my heart because of my background, and we obviously cover various topics on this show. So I always love like talking about it. Look, you're officially a friend of the show. When some of these breaches come out, we might do a special episode on it. We'd like to have you back and help you help the audience understand it from your perspective of what's really going on, so you could break it down. What we do at the end of the show, I get off stage and I'll let you talk about your company, how people can find you, and so forth.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate it. This has been great. Thanks for having me again. So I am the CTO co-founder of AppOmni. We are a SaaS security platform company. Essentially, we connect to the different SaaS applications your company is using. We help you understand what's out there and what's being used. And then we analyze how they're configured, because we know that a lot of our customers, a lot of our security customers, they need help securing all these. They need help developing this deep expertise in all these different products. And AppOmni provides them with that. We make them instant experts in the security of all these SaaS applications, so they can be confident that they're being used securely. They're not leaking data. People aren't up to nefarious things within these applications. And now the AI agents used in these platforms are, they have access to only what they should have, and they're being monitored, and they know what's out there. So thank you, everybody.
And that was great. So listen, guys, I just put AppOmni, Brian's website, on the screen, so it's part of this video forever. So you can just play this back to find it, and to go to appomni.com. To all the viewers, we also say this show is sponsored by Sweating Equity. So Tech Behind FinTech, that's more of our educational platform in which we bring experts like Brian on. Sweating Equity will be directly interviewing the CEO and getting into their background and their life, whether it's the executive and so forth. But the twist is, we'll do it while they're under pressure of an extreme workout. So that's always that's near and dear to my heart. If you know me and know my bio with my background, so that's what Sweating Equity is about. So this show is sponsored by Sweating Equity. We're going to release it in 2026. In addition, you can subscribe to our Tech Behind FinTech newsletter. You can go to techbehindfintech.com /subscribe. It's a free newsletter. You keep your finger on the pulse of fintech and all the news. Plus, you'll get a view of our upcoming guests. We have a terrific lineup in the future. So you definitely want to subscribe if you have not subscribed yet. Other than that, what I always say, whether you're watching the show live, like my good friend Jeff Martin and commenting, or you're watching it tomorrow or next year, we appreciate your viewership. We appreciate all of the DMs and the messages and that you send us. And yeah, we just appreciate it. So continue on to all. Have a great weekend. Brian, look, I always say this, right? I do this show selfishly, right? I get the chance to sit down with people like Brian, experts in their field, leaders of companies, and I have a conversation with them for an hour, you just happen to be watching it. So I really appreciate you coming on the show, Brian. Really great breaking some stuff down. I took some notes that I'll take back to the organizations I'm with and so forth. With that said, have a great weekend, my friend. And to all, have a great weekend. Take care.
Thank you, too.
Understanding the technology that powers the money is essential. Knowing the business drivers that inspire how the money is made is crucial. Bridging the gap between the mind of the technologist and the mind of the business is monumental. That is what TBF is all about. Let's start this never-ending conversation. It's time.